There is this pervasive, like almost suffocating narrative right now about the modern metropolis.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you feel it literally everywhere.
Right. You feel it on your commute, you read it in the endless stream of articles, and, well, you certainly see it in your bank account at the end of the month.
Yeah, that's usually where it hits the hardest.
Exactly. And the story goes something like this, right? If you move to the supercity, you are stepping into the greatest wealth-generating engine in human history.
That's the promise.
You are surrounded by capital, by innovation, by opportunity, and your salary is objectively, mathematically higher than it would be anywhere else.
It is. The numbers on the paycheck are bigger.
Right. And yet, despite all of that on-paper prosperity, you feel poor. The financial friction of just existing in these massive urban centers seems to be grinding young professionals down to the bone.
It's exhausting.
It really is. Every day, millions of people are essentially screaming into the void, declaring they cannot take it anymore, that they're fleeing New York or London or Tokyo.
Yep.
But then you look at the macro data, and the physical borders of these exact same cities just keep relentlessly pushing outward.
Right. The populations just continue to swell.
So what's actually happening? I mean, a lot of people think it's just corporate greed or, inflation swallowing your wealth. But the truth we're digging into today is much, much darker.
It is. It's the defining paradox of modern urban economics, really. We're witnessing this mass migration toward the very environments that the migrants claim are completely financially unlivable.
Which makes no sense.
No, it doesn't. And the traditional explanations we rely on to make sense of this are, frankly, quite shallow.
Right, the usual suspects. You sit there looking at your rent bill, and it is incredibly easy to point the finger at developers or some nebulous idea of late-stage capitalism just eating your future.
Sure, it's a comfortable scapegoat.
But we have a stack of research in front of us today for this deep dive that forces us to completely discard those comfortable scapegoats.
We really do.
We are going to unpack a genuinely monumental study. It's a 12-year anatomical dissection of French housing and land data. And what they reveal is that the financial anxiety you're feeling is not a byproduct of inevitable economic weather.
No, not at all.
It is a highly specific, mechanically engineered systemic trap. We built this.
We did. And what makes this research so compelling is that they didn't just look at high-level GDP or, broad inflation metrics.
They went way deeper.
Way deeper. They essentially performed an MRI on the entire spatial economy of France. We are talking about an analysis of over 1 million precise geographic coordinates.
Over 1 million.
Yeah, spanning 277 urban areas.
That is a massive scale.
It is. They tracked land purchases, housing transactions, and, most importantly, they drilled all the way down into the micro-level data of detailed household expenditure bills over a 12-year period.
This isn't just theory. This is the blueprint of how modern cities actually harvest human effort. Okay, so to really grasp the gravity of what this data uncovered, we have to establish the baseline. How do economists typically view the scale of a city?
Well, the fundamental framework is usually presented as a balancing act, right?
Like a scale.
Right. It's the trade-off between the incredible efficiency and productivity of clustering millions of people together versus the inevitable friction of survival.
Meaning the congestion, the wear and tear on infrastructure, the logistical nightmare of feeding and housing a population the size of a small nation.
Precisely. In classical spatial economics, the assumption has always been that there is a natural limit to urbanization governed by physical costs.
Okay, so if a city hits 10 or 12 million people, the sheer logistical complexity of maintaining that space should mathematically cause the cost of living to explode.
That's the conventional wisdom. The assumption is that you are paying for the physical inefficiency of density.
Like the garbage collection gets harder, the transit systems require massive underground engineering, the plumbing networks become incredibly complex.
Right, the physical penalty of size.
So the intuitive conclusion is that the massive cost of living in a megacity is simply that physical penalty. The cost of survival just crushes everyone.
But this is where the French data delivers the first major shock to the system.
The face slap moment.
Exactly. When the researchers isolated the core physical cost of adding people to an urban environment, that penalty was effectively non-existent.
Wait, hold on. Non-existent.
The fundamental cost of scaling a city is shockingly low.
Okay, I have to push back on this right out of the gate.
Sure.
Because if the actual physical cost of maintaining a massive city is negligible, how are they defining cost?
Wow.
Because if I walk into a grocery store in a mega city, or if I look at what it costs to simply maintain my basic physical existence, it does not feel negligible.
I completely understand that.
If the municipality isn't bleeding money to run the subway or maintain the electrical grid, why is my wallet empty? Where is that suffocating financial pressure actually coming from?
To answer that, we have to transition from looking at the operational cost of the city and start looking at the geography of the assets within it.
Okay.
Specifically, the researchers realized that to find the thief, the mechanism draining your wallet, you have to stop looking at the housing structures themselves.
Stop looking at the buildings.
Yes, you have to start looking at the dirt underneath them.
The dirt. Okay, the distinction between the brick and the dirt.
Exactly.
This is where the methodology of the study gets really fascinating. Because usually when we talk about real estate, we lump it all together, right?
We do.
You buy a house, you rent an apartment, and it's just one big transaction.
Yeah.
How do the researchers isolate the value of the dirt from the value of the building?
So they utilize these incredibly sophisticated hedonic pricing models.
Right. No academic jargon. Let's break that down for everyone listening. What is a hedonic model?
Basically, in real estate economics, a hedonic regression allows you to break down a property into its constituent characteristics.
Like taking apart a car to price the individual parts.
Exactly like that. You isolate the value of the square footage, the age of the building, the quality of the materials, the number of bathrooms, and so on.
Okay, so you price out the physical house.
Right. And by running this analysis across over 1 million transactions, they were able to statistically strip away the physical structure.
The bricks, the glass, the steel.
Yes, they stripped all that away and isolated the residual value of the exact spatial coordinate itself, just the dirt.
They isolated the pure value of the spatial monopoly.
They did.
And when they did that, this massive cognitive illusion in how we perceive urban costs completely fell apart.
It completely shattered.
Because if we look at a city like Paris, right, 12 million people in the greater area, and we compare it to a regional city like Dijon, which has maybe 300,000 people, my gut tells me the average housing price difference isn't actually that catastrophic.
Your instinct is exactly right.
Because when you read news reports, Paris includes these massive, sprawling suburban rings that must dilute the extreme high-end data of the city center.
And that dilution is precisely what masks the reality of the situation.
What's a smokescreen?
It really is. If you look at the aggregate data for the entire Parisian urban area and compare it to the national average, the overall house price is only about 28% higher.
See, 28% higher for access to a top-tier global labor market, world-class amenities, and massive international transit hubs. That seems like a perfectly rational trade-off.
It does. It doesn't sound like an existential financial crisis.
It sounds completely manageable.
It sounds manageable because it is an average spread across an enormous geographic footprint.
Right.
But when the researchers utilize those hedonic models to look exclusively at the land values, just the dirt, and they shifted their focus strictly to the physical center of Paris.
The absolute center.
Yes. When they did that, they uncovered the true structural anomaly. The monster reveals itself.
What were the numbers?
The land price in the center of Paris is not 28% higher than the national average.
What is it?
It is a staggering 1,080% higher.
Oh, wow. 1,080%.
Yes.
That is a violent distortion. Let's really unpack the mechanics of that. Because you are essentially playing a bizarre carnival game.
How do you mean?
Well, the physical cost of construction, like the labor to pour concrete, the price of a steel beam, the cost of a pane of glass, that is relatively static regardless of where you are in the country.
Exactly. The capital costs do not fluctuate wildly between Dijon and Paris. A brick is a brick.
Right. So the 1,000% premium is entirely derived from what you called spatial rent.
Yes. You aren't paying for the steel or the glass. You are being financially harvested by the mud beneath your feet.
That is such a wild concept. When you pay for an apartment in a supercity, you are under the illusion that you are paying for the shelter itself.
You think you're paying for a home.
But really, you are paying a massive toll simply for the privilege of occupying that highly specific, highly demanded geographical coordinate. The building is almost incidental to the transaction.
It really is. And this brings us to a crucial economic concept the researchers measured, which is elasticity.
Okay, let's explain elasticity simply.
Sure. Specifically, they looked at how the price of an asset stretches in response to an increase in demand, like a growing population.
Okay, so if more people want it, How fast does the price shoot up?
Exactly. And their data proves that land price elasticity is 3 times higher than house price elasticity.
Wait, break down the mechanics of why that happens. Because if demand for housing goes up, intuitively, both the house and the land should go up together. Why does the dirt stretch 3 times faster than the brick?
Because the supply of bricks is highly elastic, while the supply of central urban dirt is perfectly inelastic.
Meaning we can make more bricks, but we can't make more dirt.
Exactly. If 1 million people move to a city, we can manufacture more bricks, we can build taller buildings. The market can respond to the demand for shelter by producing more capital goods,
Right.
but we cannot manufacture a single extra square inch of land in the dead center of Paris.
The supply is permanently fixed.
Permanently. Therefore, as demand compounds, the entirety of that financial pressure is absorbed by the inelastic asset, the dirt.
Which means, and this is the brutal math here, that as a society advances, as we develop better technology, as our per capita GDP rises, and we generate massive amounts of new wealth,
Yes.
that extra wealth doesn't inherently accrue to the worker. It gets permanently frozen into immovable dirt.
That is the grim macroeconomic reality hidden in this data. Land price elasticity acts as a sponge for societal advancement.
A sponge. I like that.
The more productive the civilization becomes, the more valuable the central coordinates of that civilization become, capturing all the generated wealth.
But let's connect this back to the operational cost of the city, because this is where the trap really snaps shut on the individual.
Okay.
We've established that the dirt is hyper expensive. But we also said earlier that the physical penalty of managing the crowd is negligible.
Right.
I want to dig into the exact numbers the researchers found regarding the, what do they call it? The urban cost elasticity.
Yes, the urban cost elasticity. This is where they measured how much more a resident actually has to spend to maintain their exact standard of living when a city's population expands.
Okay, so simply put, if a city grows by 10%, how much more do you have to spend to keep your exact same lifestyle?
Right. They looked at the marginal cost of civic infrastructure.
Which you would expect to be an explosive number due to traffic and crowding and all that.
You would. Let's look at a relatively small town of, say, 100,000 people.
Okay.
The fixed costs of your infrastructure, your water treatment plant, your road network, are distributed among that population.
Makes sense.
If that town experiences a 10% population surge, bringing in 10,000 new people, the researchers found that residents only require a 0.3% increase in living costs to maintain their lifestyle.
0.3%. So tiny.
Very tiny. Because the fixed costs are now distributed among more taxpayers, but the marginal friction of adding 10,000 cars to a small road network slightly increases congestion costs, so it nets out to a tiny 0.3% bump.
Okay, but conventional wisdom assumes that as you scale up to a massive metropolis, that marginal friction should become exponential.
Exactly. People think that adding 1 million people to a city of 10 million should cause systemic gridlock and send the cost of living skyrocketing.
But the data completely refutes that, right?
Completely. In the 12 million person Parisian empire, a 10% population surge, adding over 1 million new residents, only requires the average resident to increase their spending by 0.8% to maintain their lifestyle.
Wait. 0.8%.
That's it.
That is unbelievable. Adding over 1 million people to an already dense, complex urban system barely moves the needle on the actual physical cost of living.
It's remarkably efficient. The infrastructure of a megacity is so incredibly efficient at scale that the true physical burden of growth is basically a statistical rounding error.
It's laughably low. I mean, it's so low that the higher wages of the big cities should easily cover it.
They absolutely should. Which means the financial pain residents feel is absolutely not a result of physical scarcity or infrastructural collapse.
The city can physically easily handle the people.
Easily.
So if you're listening to this and the math says you should be totally fine, why is your bank account always empty at the end of the month?
That is the big question.
If the city can physically absorb millions of people for pennies on the dollar, and the wages in the city center are commanding a premium, where is all the money going?
The surplus has to be bleeding out somewhere.
Right. So where did the researchers find it?
They answered this by looking at the literal restructuring of household budgets.
The wallet restructuring.
Exactly. When you move from a smaller city to a highly productive megacity, your money does not vanish into the ether of inefficiency. It is systematically, forcibly converted into spatial rent.
It's the hijacked wallet.
Let's look at the baseline. In a normal, mid-sized French city, the data shows that housing costs consume roughly 15.9% of an average household's income.
15.9%. That is a very healthy ratio. I mean, that leaves massive room for discretionary spending, investment, savings.
It's a great ratio, but when you track that same demographic profile into the greater Paris region, the proportion of their income devoured by housing violently expands
To what?
to 39%.
39%.
Yeah.
Almost 40% of your gross labor output is confiscated before you even begin to participate in the broader economy.
It violently swallows your budget.
And remember, we just established that this massive spike in housing cost is not paying for better building materials.
No.
And it is absolutely not paying for the municipal upkeep of the city, because that's only 0.8%,
Right. It is paying the toll.
just the toll to exist there.
The underlying logic of the modern spatial economy is laid completely bare here. The primary function of the hyperproductive city is to extract a higher percentage of human labor simply in exchange for access to its geography.
You are surrendering 40% of your productivity just for the right to stand on the board.
The more prosperous the city, the higher the percentage of your labor that is confiscated.
It fundamentally changes how you view a high-paying job in a major city. You aren't actually wealthier. Your income has just been inflated to act as a pass-through vehicle for land rents.
That's a great way to put it, a pass-through vehicle.
But here's the obvious counter-strategy that listeners might be thinking of right now.
Okay, what's that?
Well, if the price per square foot is astronomical, but your wages are high, why not just radically reduce your square footage?
Ah.
You see this constantly, right? Young professionals moving into micro studios or, sharing a two-bedroom apartment with 4 people. If you shrink your spatial footprint enough, shouldn't you be able to outmaneuver the trap and keep your surplus wage?
That is the rational microeconomic response. You attempt to consume less of the hyper-expensive asset.
Exactly. Just rent a smaller apartment and save the money.
But the researchers discovered that the trap is far more dynamic than just static land values. The real crisis isn't just spatial.
It's not.
No, it is deeply embedded in how these markets behave over time, and this brings us to the short-term shocks.
Okay, the dimension of time. Let's talk about the 12-year window.
Yes. So while the long-term cost elasticity of adding population to a city is a gentle 0.8%, Combes and his team found something genuinely terrifying when they analyzed the short-term data.
Terrifying how?
When a surge of population hits a major urban area over a condensed period, the cost jump doesn't hover at 0.8%.
What does it do?
It skyrockets to an apocalyptic 30%.
Wait, a 30% spike in the cost of living over a short-term window? I mean, I have to question the methodology here. How can they definitively isolate that massive 30% spike purely to the influx of people? Couldn't that just be the result of macroeconomic inflation during that 12-year period, or the cost of raw materials spiking during a cyclical building boom?
It is a vital question, and they accounted for it. The researchers utilized a variety of fixed effects regressions to control for national macroeconomic trends, inflation, and fluctuating interest rates.
So they stripped all the outside noise away.
They did. They isolated the local demand shocks. And what they proved is that this 30% spike is not the result of natural market forces or material costs.
And what is it?
It is the direct mathematical result of an artificial boundary.
The invisible wall.
Exactly. To understand this sudden spike, we have to look at the mechanics of land use regulations.
Zoning laws, urban growth boundaries, historic preservation mandates.
Right. To stop urban sprawl, governments created massive invisible walls. Now, the market's natural response to a population influx and a 30% price spike should be a massive, rapid deployment of capital to build more housing.
To build taller, to build denser, to expand the footprint.
But the law forbids it.
The law artificially freezes the supply of permissible dirt.
Exactly.
Let's use a pressure cooker analogy here because I think it perfectly illustrates the mechanism.
Okay, let's hear it.
The population growth, the influx of human capital driven by the economic engine of the city, is a heat being applied to the pot.
Right.
The volume of the pot itself is the housing supply. Now, in a free market, as the heat rises, the pot should expand. Developers should buy single-family lots and build mid-rises. They should convert industrial zones into residential blocks.
But zoning regulations act as a welded lid on that pressure cooker.
Exactly. When you implement strict floor area ratios, or you mandate massive minimum lot sizes, or you create invisible sightline corridors that make vertical construction illegal, you are welding the lid shut.
The heat continues to rise, but the volume is legally forbidden from expanding.
And the resulting 30% spike in price is just the raw, explosive pressure of unaccommodated demand.
That's a perfect analogy, and we have to be incredibly careful to examine the incentives behind these policies objectively.
Right, because we aren't taking sides here.
Exactly. The political mechanisms that weld that lid shut are well-intentioned. They are not inherently malicious. They are usually driven by the rational economic self-interest of the existing residents.
What economists call the home voter hypothesis, right?
Yes. If I already own a piece of that hyper-valuable dirt, it is absolutely in my financial interest to vote for city council members who promise to restrict new development.
Right. I want to preserve the neighborhood character, which is often a polite way of saying I want to artificially restrict supply to guarantee my asset appreciates.
It is a protective instinct. Current residents vote to prevent congestion, to protect greenbelts, and to ensure their property values don't dilute. It's aimed at protecting the environment and the current residents.
Sure, the intentions are good, but the data ruthlessly dismantles this wishful thinking.
It really does, because the macroscopic result of millions of micro-decisions to restrict land use is catastrophic for incoming generations. Because dirt is locked up, housing cannot adapt to the people flowing in.
So, did the researchers model the alternative? Did they run a counterfactual simulation to see what the data would look like if we smashed that invisible wall?
They did, and it is perhaps the most shocking piece of data in the entire study.
What happens?
They ran the numbers to calculate what the cost elasticity would be if the invisible walls were dismantled. If the physical boundaries and densities of the city were allowed to naturally and fluidly expand with the population flowing in.
If the market was legally permitted to build enough housing to meet the demand, what happens to that violent 30% short-term cost explosion?
It plummets. If the city's housing supply can organically expand, that 30% cost spike drops to a completely harmless 4.3%.
Wait, a drop from 30% to 4.3%, simply by removing the artificial legal constraints on construction.
That's what the data shows.
That is, this is the ultimate betrayal. It completely reframes the narrative of urban poverty.
Well,
what is destroying young people's futures isn't that the city is objectively too big or that there are too many people.
no.
It is an entirely manufactured crisis. It is artificial, legally mandated land starvation.
It's an artificial famine. We have the capital, the engineering capability, and the sheer physical space to easily house these populations, but we have institutionally mandated a state of starvation.
It is a massive institutional failure that manifests as a silent tax on the young and the newly arrived. The 30% spike is essentially a wealth transfer from the productive labor force to the entrenched asset holders, enforced by municipal zoning codes.
Exactly.
Okay, but this inevitably leads us to the most perplexing question of all.
Why do people stay?
Yes. If the math is this clear, if it's so obviously a rigged game of land harvesting, and if you are functionally surrendering 40% of your income just to exist inside a pressure cooker, why does nobody leave?
It's the big question.
Why are you still there?
Yeah.
You, the listener, why haven't you packed up your life and moved to a mid-sized city where rent is 16% of your income and the lid is off the pot?
Because the trap is not just a mechanism of extraction, it is a mechanism of retention. The cold equations of space economics are brutally efficient.
Explain that.
The researchers identified a perfect self-calibrating equilibrium at play here. To understand it, we have to look at the exact value of the bait on the hook.
The bait.
The agglomeration economies.
Okay, let's define the mechanics of agglomeration clearly, because it's not just being around other people, is it?
No, it is highly specific economic phenomena. Agglomeration economies are the systemic benefits that arise when firms and people locate near one another together in cities and industrial clusters.
Right.
It breaks down into a few core mechanisms: labor market pooling, input sharing, and knowledge spillovers.
Let's break those down. Labor market pooling means, like, if you are a highly specialized software engineer, you move to Silicon Valley because if your startup fails on a Tuesday, you can walk across the street and get a new job on a Wednesday.
Exactly. The density dramatically lowers your career risk.
And input sharing.
That means specialized supply chains become incredibly efficient. You have the exact right supplier right down the street.
And knowledge spillovers refer to the rapid, informal transfer of ideas that only happens through physical proximity, right?
Yes, the proverbial conversations at the coffee shop that lead to billion-dollar patents.
So Combs and his team attempted to quantify the exact financial value of this agglomeration magic.
They did.
What is the actual premium a worker receives for participating in this hyperdense network?
Well, after controlling for the fact that cities naturally attract higher skilled workers to begin with, the researchers isolated the pure agglomeration wage premium.
And what was it?
They found that living and working in a massive supercity gives a worker a baseline productivity and wage boost of roughly 2 to 3% over a smaller city.
2 to 3%.
Yes.
On its face, that seems incredibly small. I mean, if my rent is eating 40% of my income, a 3% bump in top-line revenue doesn't seem like enough to keep me from fleeing the city.
But you have to look at the big picture. You have to see how that 2 to 3% compounding wage premium interacts with the urban cost penalty we discussed earlier.
How so?
The researchers mapped the wage premium directly against the aggregated costs of urban friction, the slight increase in commuting time, the inflated cost of the dirt, the higher local taxes.
And what did the regression show?
It showed a flawless mathematical equilibrium.
Meaning?
The extra capital you generate from the agglomeration benefit is almost precisely absorbed by the spatial rent and the minor urban frictions.
They perfectly cancel each other out.
Exactly. The data proves that the agglomeration benefit interlocks with the rising costs, like gears in a machine.
That is a terrifyingly elegant system.
It operates like a mechanical governor on an engine. You stay in the supercity, enduring the crushing density, the noise, and the spatial poverty, because the intense networking, the career security, and that tiny wage premium are exactly enough to keep you alive.
It is a flawlessly engineered hamster wheel.
It really is.
The city gives you exactly enough extra calories to keep running the wheel, but mathematically guarantees you will never, ever store enough fat to escape the cage.
That's exactly how the equilibrium works. If the agglomeration wages rise due to a tech boom, the inelasticity of the land means the rents immediately rise to absorb that exact new surplus.
It's self-balancing.
Yes. If rents were somehow pushed higher than the agglomeration premium could support, the labor force would face true starvation and would be forced to physically evacuate.
Which would crash the local economy.
Exactly. So the wages bump up just enough to maintain the equilibrium of extraction.
Zero net gain for the worker, but massive compounding net gains for the entity that holds the deed to the dirt.
Precisely. And this is why we have to zoom out now.
Right. This isn't just a quirk of French bureaucracy.
Not at all. The researchers were utilizing France because the centralized nature of their bureaucracy provided incredibly clean, standardized data. But the mechanics they proved are universal.
The laws of spatial economics don't care if you are in Paris or San Francisco or Tokyo or London.
They apply universally. Whether it's New York or London, this 10-year data stack is a cross-section of the entire modern world.
We have spent the last 50 years undergoing an unprecedented era of technological acceleration and globalization.
We have.
We have generated unimaginable sums of wealth through the internet, through global supply chains, through massive leaps in per capita productivity.
But the data shows that this rising tide did not lift all boats equally because the fundamental constraints of physical space were never resolved.
Instead, capital has utilized the artificial scarcity of land to quietly siphon all the massive dividends of globalization straight into the pockets of the earliest asset hoarders.
The individuals and institutions who secured the central spatial coordinates before the invisible walls were welded shut.
It is impossible to look at the cold, hard mathematics of this study and not feel the historical gravity of this. We are watching a terrifying historical rerun.
The parallels are definitely there.
When you unpack the mechanisms of how land scarcity extracts the labor surplus of the working class, we are quite literally looking at the exact economic dynamics of ancient Rome.
It's true. If you examine the structure of capital rent versus spatial rent in antiquity, it matches perfectly.
Think about it. In the late Roman Republic, you had an influx of capital and populations flooding into the capital. The elite patrician class realized that the true source of compounding wealth wasn't in trade or military conquest.
It was in monopolizing the physical footprint of the city.
Yes, they built those massive, precarious, multi-story apartment blocks and charged the plebeian class exorbitant spatial rents simply for the right to live near the economic and political center of the empire.
The patricians understood that the supply of land inside the city walls was perfectly inelastic.
Exactly. As long as the empire grew, the demand for that specific dirt would compound, allowing them to extract the surplus labor of the working class indefinitely.
And here we are, 2 millennia later.
Right. From the ancient Romans fighting over space inside the city walls, to a 20-something today burning their youth for a rented bed in a shared apartment.
Working 70-hour weeks at a hyper-innovative tech firm, only to hand over 40% of their gross income.
The technology has changed, the architecture has changed, but the logic of the empire never changed.
Which leads to a very sobering final synthesis regarding the limits of technological progress.
What's that?
The data strongly suggests that as long as physical space is gated by institutions, it does not matter how advanced our technology gets. The bottom tier will always fight just to survive.
We could develop cold fusion. We could invent zero-point energy and hyperloop transit systems that radically increase our baseline productivity.
And it wouldn't alter the core equation.
Because any technological surplus generated by those innovations would simply trigger the mechanical governor.
Exactly. The land rent would instantly rise to consume the new surplus, keeping the working class in the exact same state of perpetual equilibrium.
Tech's hyperspeed cannot outrun the ancient, vampiric nature of city land rent.
It's the definitive anatomy of the trap, as proven by the data.
It is the perfect closed loop. The rules lock the borders. The locked borders explode the land prices.
The hyperinflated land prices systematically drain your dreams and your financial surplus.
And the agglomeration economies, the absolute necessity of proximity for your career, trap you inside the system.
That is the cycle.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought.
Always good to leave them thinking.
We have spent this entire hour examining the ironclad laws of spatial economics. The idea that you must be physically present in the megacity to reap the agglomeration benefits, and that you must surrender your wealth to the landowners to achieve that proximity.
That's what the data has shown for decades.
But we are currently standing on the precipice of a massive shift in digital realities. As we look at a future where artificial intelligence threatens the very value of human labor, and remote work and digital labor pools become the norm.
The decoupling of productivity from geography.
Exactly. We are beginning to prove that knowledge spillovers and input sharing might not actually require physical proximity anymore.
It's a fascinating shift.
So ask yourself this: if the digital world finally allows us to break the physical need for agglomeration, if you can generate that wage premium from a small town where rent is only 15% of your income, will the trillion-dollar land monopolies of our megacities simply evaporate overnight?
If the necessity of proximity dies, the entire economic foundation of the supercity dies with it.
Are we about to watch the ultimate historical collapse of the spatial rent trap, leaving the earliest asset hoarders holding nothing but highly priced empty dirt? Or is our modern world blindly, happily marching right into the exact same systemic collapse that ended every great empire before us?
It's the ultimate question for the next decade.
It really is. And suddenly the prospect of escaping the trap doesn't seem like a mathematical impossibility anymore. It seems like the inevitable next chapter. We will see you next time on The Deep Dive.